the integrity of the elections, over the last 24 hours. How did we do?
Well, there are two things that we should be talking about, I suppose. One is, and because we saw this in 2016, there are at least two avenues where we've seen interference in our elections. One is with the election infrastructure. And I would say when it comes to the mechanics of the elections, things for most people looked pretty good yesterday. There's some notable glitches, but by and large, it looked like a normal election. And I didn't see anything yesterday in terms of that infrastructure, the voting machines, the reporting on election night, that it looked like there was any kind of interference.
Well, there were reports of voting machines, electronic voting machines breaking down across the country, and as a result, long lines. We can expect some people probably just went home or went to their jobs because they couldn't stand in those long lines. What's the extent of that, and why did it happen?
Yeah. Sadly, I think that happened more than it should happen, and where we did see it, in most cases, I think we can tie it to how old our equipment is. We've got in the states that really saw problems, Georgia is an example, South Carolina, Philadelphia, we heard of examples of machines sometimes flipping votes. We heard that in early voting. We heard on election day where it wasn't registering the vote that the voter intended, and machines breaking down, and those kinds of things lead to long lines. And I think that really comes down to a lack of investment in all of those cases in Texas as well. You've got some really old machines, and they just need to be replaced. I will say I haven't seen any evidence that was the result of foul play, but the flip side of reliability is security, and if we continue to use those systems, we do leave ourselves vulnerable in 2020, particularly if these machines that don't have paper backups. As Undersecretary of the Department of Homeland Security, Chris Krebs, said, 2020 is the big game, and I think we need to be prepared for that.
So let's talk about potential foul play. Sarah, we got notified by Facebook that they had taken down these accounts in the middle of Election Day. What exactly happened?
So on Sunday night, Facebook gets a warning from federal authorities that it may have some accounts on Facebook and Instagram that were linked to the IRA, which, as you said, was related to the 2016 election interference. And Facebook has been trying to invest in finding these things. Their latest tip comes from the federal government. They take them down, and then the IRA puts out a post, or someone claiming to be them at least, puts out a post listing the accounts, sort of taking credit for what they've done. And Facebook removed a few more. And then a little bit after polls close, they come out and say, linking these accounts more directly to the IRA. They're still not definitively saying if this is coming from Russia. We have found other election interference type campaigns using fake accounts on Facebook in the last few months that are from Iran, that are from domestic actors. So far they think this is Russia, but we're not sure yet.
And Lawrence, both Sarah and I have been inside Facebook's election war room, where they've got a team of people, working across all of these potential threats. And the familiar refrain from in there is that actually the biggest threats, the most activity they saw was from within the United States, not from outside the United States. Despite this revelation of accounts potentially connected to the IRA. How dangerous is that? How much of a threat is that?
Well, first of all, I should say that there's additional information about the IRA. There was the U.S. attorney fingered a conspiracy at the beginning of just about a month ago, saying that there was a conspiracy to with about a $10 million a year budget to post on social media to buy ads that were meant to interfere in our election. So that's ongoing. And I would say the concern there is what it might signal for the future. And that is, while it wasn't nearly what it was in 2018 compared to what we saw in 2016, my concern would be that they're going to come back in a big way ahead of 2020 when the stakes are much bigger. And again, this other area of election infrastructure, while we didn't see a lot of activity in this election, that we have to be worried, again, that they're going to come back in a bigger way in 2020. And I think we have to take the necessary steps to protect from that.
Sarah, you have a new piece out today that talks about how even before the election happened, Facebook and Google were the ad winners. How big?
So political ad spending is up across the board, and I think that ties a little bit to what we've seen in terms of voter turnout and just the excitement and energy around from both sides trying to figure out how this election is going to affect us given sort of the divisive political climate right now. So political spending is up. It has nothing to do with, there's been no sort of fallback in spending related to some of the problems we've seen. One thing I would point out, though, is the transparency efforts from the companies to try to make that spending a little more accountable to their users, to make it clear who's paying for what ads. There have been reports coming out in the last few weeks saying that is very easy to falsify on Facebook, that they need to secure that system. There were reporters who went out and bought ads in the name of Mitch McConnell, in the name of ISIS, in the name of Mike Pence. It is very easy to say the ad is paid for by someone who it's not paid for by.
That is just so fascinating. Now, Larry, there's a chance of runoffs in Georgia in particular. You know, this is a place where there were reports of voter flipping, the long lines, the failed machines. What could they learn or fix, you know, in time for an election in a matter of weeks?
Well, look, a really big thing, and we saw a problem with this yesterday in Georgia, is they need to have backups if machines go down. So we had reports in Georgia of lines for hours when machines went down, of running out of paper ballots. They should have emergency paper ballots there, 2 to 3 hours worth, so that if something goes down and it takes some time to fix or replace the equipment, people can continue to vote. And they obviously didn't have that in places where people were on lines, but in some cases they were saying 4.5 hours.
Now, Sarah, what is the status of the Facebook election war room at this point? Does that war room remain open? What are the upcoming elections around the world that they might be monitoring?
Well, they're monitoring all sorts of elections. One thing I've heard from sources within Facebook is that people are incredibly focused on the 2020 election. Just like you're saying, that's really the future here. That's what this is been preparing for. The war room, in effect, is testing all of the systems to see if they're willing to, you know, update them and fix them, and maybe even introduce new secure measures ahead of 2020 to make sure that these systems get stronger. So I think that really is the ultimate goal. But in between now and then, there are plenty of elections around the world where Facebook's war room will be operating. They haven't said anything about sort of the long-term usage of that room. This is kind of a test, but hopefully we'll hear more from them on that, and also more from them on these Russian accounts. Hopefully we'll get to see what these accounts are posting and how long they were active for and what effect they may have had.
And, you know, security experts have said the U.S. midterm elections may not be as vulnerable as a big presidential election, because for foreign actors, it's really confusing. There are so many different races. It's difficult to know whether certain local issues are good for that actor or not. So it really is, Larry, about 2020. You know, there's been bipartisan election security legislation that hasn't quite made it through Congress. With a Democratic House now, does that legislation stand a chance?
Look, I think the Democrats have said in the House that this is going to be a priority for them. So I think they are going to push this harder than it was pushed probably in the last couple of years. So I do think that there's a chance. There was a lot of bipartisan support in the Senate. For whatever reason, it didn't get out of committee. But I would expect that there's going to be a lot more focus on this in Congress, and that may end up pushing things through. And I should say that's on the infrastructure side. On the social media side, of course, everything that Facebook and Google are doing right now in this space is voluntary. Unlike TV and radio and print, by accident, they are not subject to the same kinds of laws and regulations. And so we may see a push there as well for them to actually have to follow some federal regulations on this.
All right. Well, we'll, of course, be covering potential runoffs.